Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Wajaha and today we are doing another deep dive. Now for those of you new here, I'm a doctor but I love crypto, and if you go to my channel you'll find lots and lots of content, everything you could possibly want to find about DeFi. But we do a series on this channel called Deep Dives where we basically go in depth on a particular protocol, blockchain, you name it. And they're typically longer videos, so as always, sit back, relax, grab yourself a cup of tea, make some notes if you want to, because this is going to be a long one again. Now today the topic of choice is going to be oracles, and in particular we are focusing on API3. Now the reason why, one of the reasons why anyway, that I think this is relevant is that we did actually do a deep dive on Chainlink, which is probably the leader in the oracle space at the moment. And I thought, API3, the team did also reach out to me, and I thought it would be a really good piece that we could make, hopefully kind of educate some people and to just enlighten kind of what API3 is, how they work, what they offer. And we're going to cover a lot today. In fact, this is what we're going to cover. First of all, oracles, what actually API3 is, some stuff about first party versus third party oracles, the product suite that API3 offer. We're going to talk about the DAO, the token, some of the partners and teams, competition, drawbacks, and then some of my own personal thoughts at the end. So we've got a lot to cover today. So as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy this one. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. I think the first thing to just kind of appreciate is, what is an oracle? And an oracle, as I've mentioned before, is just basically something that connects real-world data to a blockchain. Blockchains or smart contracts by themselves cannot access data. They can't connect with the real world. And so you need something in order to help them do that. That's basically what oracles do. Most of this data, from oracles themselves, they come from Web2 companies wanting to post their data on chain to various different customers or consumers like you and I. But when some of these oracle providers came out, the development didn't really consider whether or not they should be decentralized, and specifically the nodes themselves collecting and delivering this oracle data. That kind of ties into some of the problems that we have today with some of the oracles around. And that is essentially that we're kind of, at the moment, with some of these big oracle providers, we're actually trusting third parties to deliver this data on chain. And most of the current oracle providers do try to kind of get or mitigate this by using a variety of oracles. But ultimately, it doesn't really solve that issue, does it? You're still having to trust these third parties rather than potentially delivering the data yourself. And so that is a big problem that we have at the moment with some of the different oracles that we do have. But yeah, that's pretty much the oracle problem. That's also what oracles are, for those of you who are new to this sort of stuff. And I also just wrote a little bit about what an API is. API stands for Application Programming Interface. To summarize very, very briefly, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but essentially it just allows applications to interact with external services via, specific commands. So we're not going to go into too much regarding that. We see APIs on pretty much every single application that exists right now. And they're very, very important. We use them everywhere in Web 2, and we need to use them in Web 3 as well. So I hope that all made sense. Of course, if it doesn't, make sure you leave a comment down below as well. So what actually is API3? Well, as we mentioned, there are some issues with the oracle providers that we have around at the moment. So what API3, and I quote them, this is what they say, is that they want to deliver traditional API services to smart contract platforms in a decentralized and trust minimized way. Of course, they have a whole bunch of things that we need to look into to kind of appreciate that. That is a one-liner on API3. The main premise that I think API3 offer is this thing known as first-party oracles, and we're going to talk about that in some of the coming slides as well. But there's a really nice graphic here that basically just showcases everything that you probably need to know about API3 in one page. So the fact that they have first-party oracles, and we're going to talk about these in a moment. We've got managed decentralized APIs. We're going to talk about that as well. Oracle extractable value. We're going to talk about some of the different partnerships as well that they have here as well, and the API3 market. They provide data feeds for over 120 of them, in fact, across a variety of different chains. And these are live for us all to use right now, actually. And some of the products and solutions that API3 offer are Airnodes, Decentralized APIs, Oracle Extractable Value, QRNG. I think this should actually be on here as well, and Web3 APIs. And we're going to basically talk about some of these as well in the coming slides as well. So yeah, that's pretty much a brief overview of what API3, but we need to delve a lot deeper, I think, as well. So the API3 ecosystem works like this. You've got a number of different players. You've got decentralized applications. So whether or not that's your favorite stuff like Uniswap, Aave, your lending protocols, your perpetual exchanges like GMX, you name it pretty much. There are lots of decentralized applications, and a lot of them, in fact, probably all of them, use some sort of oracle because they need to connect real world data on chain. Now that could be something as simple as a price feed, but you know that data needs to come to the smart contract in one way, shape or form. So what would a decentralized application that needs this sort of stuff do? Well, they obviously need to use these decentralized APIs or APIs in nature, and they obviously need to come from an API provider. So an API provider can supply this data. It can go directly to the applications. The application will pay a subscription fee for those particular APIs, which will go into this pool. And this pool is basically managed by the API3 DAO, decentralized organization, which basically manages this. And yeah, that's pretty much how it works. Now, of course, there needs to be some sort of collateral in this pool. The stakeholders will stake their assets into this pool, and they'll earn a reward for basically collateralizing it. They, in return, will have governance votes that they can use to basically vote on various different aspects of the protocol going forward. And of course, they can earn some rewards. And of course, in this case with API3, we are actually hoping that the actual users of these decentralized APIs are the actual API providers themselves, and we're going to talk about all of this in a lot more detail now. So first party versus third party oracles, what do we need to know? Well, the premise is essentially that first party oracles are operated by the data providers themselves, and that's basically what I just mentioned. You know, the actual applications that perhaps want to use some of these oracles, first party oracles are ones that are used by them themselves. Third party oracles are the ones that we're probably a little bit more familiar with. The likes of Chainlink use third-party oracles, and they're oracles that are not connected or not operated by the data source. So, for example, in the case of Chainlink have node operators, which basically bring that data to the actual data source from the data source to the chain. Whereas first-party oracles, they're doing it themselves. The data source providers are actually operating those oracles. And some of the issues that we have with third-party oracles are basically, I've written some of them down here. We'll just talk about some of them. Well, of course, because if you've got additional nodes coming into the place that are not kind of connected or operated by the data source, well, we've got increased attack vectors. One of them could be the source of security deficit. The second element that I've just written here is about the confidential information aspect. So, for example, if you had some sort of sensitive data, you perhaps don't want to expose that to a third party. You perhaps want to keep that as secure as possible. And with first-party oracles, you don't need to expose that data. Of course, when you've got additional players in place, there's going to be additional payments. So you're going to have increased costs. You're going to have the middleman tax, as they say. There's questions about decentralization, and of course, are these sources even reliable in the first place? I think that's something that you really need to consider when using a third party as well. And there's a reputation factor involved with that as well. So you can see here, this is a picture. This is basically how Chainlink and some of these other protocols operate. They've got the API, you've got the node operators in the middle, and then going to the decentralized app. Rather with first-party oracles, which is kind of the solution. Well, one of the solutions that API3 is offering is that the data sources providers themselves operate the oracles. You cut out the middleman. That saves money. It's more secure, and you don't need to expose your data to third parties as well. So lots of benefits for using first-party oracles rather than third-party oracles. Now we'll talk about some of the products that API3 offer and kind of how they utilize this first-party Oracle. And the main thing to kind of understand here is that they have something called Airnode, which are essentially these nodes that the data owners can use themselves to post their data on chain. And this is open source, super easy to use. You don't need any intermediary requirements. You don't need a server, it's completely serverless. And essentially they have this set and forget philosophy. And I found this from the docs as well. And I'll try and leave a link to them in the description below so you can have a read of the documentation yourself. But yeah, they have this set and forget philosophy that brings off-chain data from APIs to on-chain smart contracts. And the written on the side here, that is actually an off-chain system that feeds data to an aggregator using Ethereum nodes. And the aggregator contract is a decentralized API that is callable from lots of other contracts. So in essence, Airnode is an Oracle node, but it is operated by the API providers themselves in a way that's very, very easy, as little friction as possible. So yeah, feel free to pause the video here to kind of read some of the different change or some of the comparison that I found online, comparing kind of third-party oracles to first-party oracles like Airnode. And of course, these are free to use as well. Decentralized APIs are essentially the on-chain data feeds sourced from off-chain first-party oracles that are, as we mentioned, operated by the API providers themselves. And they're specifically engineered for some of these decentralized applications to basically have a similar sort of feel to traditional web APIs. And there's kind of two main types. The first one being is the self-funded. That's actually live at the moment, and they are, your single source data feeds, for example. They cost nothing. They're live at the moment. You can access them yourself. If you go to API3 markets, you can see lots of self-funded decentralized APIs that are live right now. You can interact with them straight away. Managed APIs or decentralized APIs, I should say, are coming pretty soon, and they are going to be multi-source, so they're going to see output from multiple providers aggregated and served directly into decentralized apps. And there will be some additional component that the API3 team will have to help with, but these are going to be managed, and because of that, they're going to have some level of subscription, and that should hopefully bring some revenue into API3. And at the moment, these aren't live yet, but as far as I'm aware, they are coming this year. So that, that's something to really look forward to. I've got this diagram here to basically showcase how to activate a self-funded decentralized API. These, of course, are the single source ones that we have available at the moment. And you can see here that in order to activate one, basically an owner of a decentralized application, all they need to do is deposit some collateral into a sponsor wallet, and the collateral will basically cover all the gas costs that are associated with the first-party oracles when they kind of update the decentralized API on chain. So all you have to do, fund your wallet, connect to Airnode, and it's going to do its thing. It's going to do its thing. And you can see I've put a picture of the API3 market. You can see we've got lots of data feeds here, whether that's the Aave USD, ApeCoin USD, API3 USD, ADA USD. You've got all these different price feeds. You can see all the different networks that these are on at the moment. These are live at the moment, and you can fund them yourself with gas, so they're free to use otherwise, and I think it's a really, really nice model actually. And you can see here, I did see this tweet online, which basically has an interface just showing kind of how you provide gas to basically update this feed over time. And you can see, look, there's a certain amount of ETH here, a fair amount actually, but this lasts 8 months, so a fair amount of time here. And yeah, that works really well. And obviously you can imagine that on certain chains that have cheaper gas fees, the amount that you have to pay for this is going to be significantly less as well. Yeah, you can go to market.api3 and basically have a look yourself here. Oracle extractable value. Now, we might spend a little more time talking about this here, so just perhaps it might be a good time to just pause the video, recap some of the stuff if you want to, but we're going to talk about Oracle extractable value here, and this can get a little bit complex as well. Now, Oracle extractable value is a subset of MEV, and we're going to just briefly talk about MEV as well. MEV is basically the maximum extractable value from a blockchain by reordering some of the blocks in a specific on a specific chain. Now, I've got this example here of what's known as a sandwich attack, and this is a type of MEV, and there's many different types of MEV. You could actually spend hours and hours talking about MEV and what it is, but we're not going to do that today. I'm just going to kind of briefly just mention one type just so you can get a hang of what MEV is. So this is someone who's actually buying an altcoin of some sort. I don't know what it is, but I did just find this just briefly just searching online. And there's two players in here. You've got the bot, which is actually buying and selling, and you've got the user, which could just be like me or you, just trying to buy a altcoin. So the user here is the transaction in the middle, and he's got 10.3 ETH and he's trying to buy this altcoin. So he's basically spent $19,825 on this altcoin, buying it at a price of $2.92 per asset. But you'll notice that this asset, or this transaction I should say, sorry, is actually sandwiched in between two other transactions, a buy and a sell. Essentially what's happened is that there's a bot who's basically realized that this person is doing this transaction. They've submitted a purchase order, paid higher gas, so their purchase goes before, and then as soon as that purchase, this big 10 ETH purchase comes through, obviously the price goes up. They've straight away dumped that same amount, and you can see that they bought 3,606.72 assets. They've sold the same amount, but you can see the purchasing price 10.3 thousand. They're selling for 10,500. So they've been able to basically manipulate some. I say manipulate. They've just been able to extract some extra value by, doing their transaction, paying a little bit more gas, and getting their transaction in. And that's because when any sort of transaction is done, before it's actually published on the chain, it gets sent to a mempool, which is visible to everyone, so everyone can see all the transactions coming in the next mempool, in the mempool at the moment, and you can front run it, arbitrage it, you can do whatever you want with it. And at the moment, stuff like this happens all the time. At the end of the day, the user here, this person who paid 10.3 ETH, they got ripped off a little bit. They're the ones that are having to pay for this at the end of the day. Otherwise, it's the application themselves. And it's not very good, or it is very good. I mean, that's basically just how the blockchain works. Takes advantage. The people who are able to take advantage of the maximum extractable value per block can do so. Now, when you're bringing data off-chain to on-chain, well, the same principles apply. For a short period of time, that transaction is going to be visible to everyone in the mempool. And so that data that you've brought online, it can be front-run, arbitraged, whatever. And this particularly, an example could be for, let's say if you've got a lending platform like Aave, and you've got a bunch of loans that are going to be liquidated. Well, that data for the price feed needs to come from somewhere, right? Well, it comes from an oracle that brings it on chain. But when it does come on chain, it's going to be in the mempool, so it's going to be visible for a short period of time, and users or organizations or applications or bots or you name it, they can front run it or arbitrage it. And yeah, ultimately that's paid for by the users and by the applications. Now, one of the issues is that you can't continuously update these data points in real time because the gas costs are just way too high. Imagine on Ethereum mainnet, if you're kind of doing this continuously, there's no chance. You just can't do it. The gas is just too expensive. And so essentially what Oracle Extractable Value is essentially a way to capture some of the profits from MEV but give them back to the users and the applications. And this is essentially how it works as an auction. People bid to kind of update these Oracle prices, and a winner kind of updates the Oracle price. And the DApp can obviously earn some of the money that comes from this OEV. And, a lot of the benefits are just pretty self-explanatory. We return some of the value back to some of the applications and the users, capture increased returns. We don't need to increase fees as much anymore. Applications can kind of reduce their fees. You've got more accurate data as well. I think at the moment, DeFi applications specifically things like perpetual exchanges like GMX, lending platforms like Aave, or even kind of other DeFi farms will actually utilize this the most, in my opinion. And that's just because of the examples that I've just mentioned above. And I found this in the API3 Telegram. The MEV industry is in the high 8 figures, nearing billions. Anything of that is related to oracles is basically up for grabs at the moment, and this is by far the biggest. This is by far the bigger exponential potential than a mere subscription fee. So this really goes to show that API3 are really looking to develop this so that it can be integrated with all these different applications, and that's because the MEV industry is so profitable. High 8 figures, probably going higher than that as we kind of expand DeFi and expand everything related to crypto. So this is pretty much up for grabs at the moment, and API3 are really looking to capitalize on this as well. So a really, really interesting product, and I think this is one that's going to really drive revenue for the API3 DAO. So yeah, highly looking forward to this. Next, we're going to talk about QRNG. Now, smart contracts can't generate truly random numbers, so again, they have to rely on oracles, oracle services. And QRNG is a type of random number generation using quantum mechanics, or quantum phenomena. So it's probably one of the highest levels of RNG that you could probably get. And API3 have made this free to use, purely value for everyone using. And there's actually no profit made by API3 for this. They've got a model here where basically you can integrate this with your smart contracts and all you do is pay gas. So a really lovely model. I think this is this already does in fact have a lot of use case already, and I've just written some of the industries that this is going to be really prominent in. So things like gaming, perhaps when you're playing a game and you have random hit charts, those kind of applications or games will need something like what API3 is providing in order to kind of generate those random numbers on chain. NFTs, let's say you're minting an NFT. How do you know which one of the thousands of traits you're going to get? Again, you're going to need something like quantum RNG. Gambling as well. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. You need random numbers, you need random generation, and so those types of applications are all looking to introduce something like what API3's got here with QRNG. And yeah, I think oracles are needed on chain. I think this basically explains it better than ever, that you need oracles because smart contracts themselves are pretty useless. They can't generate true random numbers. So yeah, that's pretty much what QRNG is, and already there's a lot of protocols or applications using this, but they have a model that all you need to do is pay gas. So because of this, it works well for both parties. Yes, API3 don't make a profit from this, but it does give value. People will start using API3's products, and I think if you kind of introduce this with the OEV and possibly some of the other stuff as well, and I think this works well for API3 in the long run. We'll talk about the DAO, and basically, as we mentioned, API3 is run by the API3 DAO, a collaborative effort to basically monetize everything that API3 does, is specifically the decentralized APIs at scale, and it is involved around governance, security, and the value capture of the API3 token. There is an API3 DAO tracker that I think is really good to use, but basically showcases all the different members who basically token holders, lots of the different proposals, good and bad, all from the history since API3 started. And we can see lots of good data. I like to look at this sort of stuff. So when you stake your API3 tokens, you can earn around 12% APY. You can see how that changed over time. You can see tokens locked by governance, vesting, and all the different smart contracts as well. You can see things like circulating supply, total supply. Well, total's not written here, but we'll talk about that later. But yeah, circulating supply you can see, and then you can see all the different wallets. So all the different holders of API3. So it did a really good tracker. I thought I'd just put this on here as well. But yeah, also some of the proposals as well. And the API3 has essentially two different teams: the hierarchy teams and the sub-DAO teams. And the DAO grants funds for various proposals. And there's two different types of proposals. We have the primary proposals, which are just your regular ones that anyone can create, or any API3 token holder can create, which require a 50% pass rate in order to proceed. But we also have secondary proposals, which users who have 0.1% of the overall voting power, so you're talking big whales here, can process, and they only need 15% to pass. So for example, if I wanted to do a proposal, I don't have any API3 tokens at the moment, and so what I would do is I'd have to find someone else who's got some voting power, communicate with them, and hopefully I could get a secondary proposal done via them. But if I want to do a primary proposal, I'll have to get a 50% pass rate in order to get that through. And yeah, that's a brief summary of what the API3 DAO is all about. But yeah, capture of the token, governance, and also security as well. We'll talk about that now when we talk about let's go to the next slide, the API3 token. Now, the API3 token has got three main functions: governance, as we just mentioned, staking, as we also just mentioned, and collateral. Now, staked API3 tokens are actually used as collateral for the on-chain kind of service that API3 offers, and will be used as coverage to provide quantifiable and trustless security. So in the case that some of the data feeds are incorrect and kind of users of a specific application lose money because of that, well, your staked assets are used as collateral in those scenarios. So yeah, there's three main functions, and I think all of them are important in kind of maintaining the overall economy of the API3 ecosystem. In terms of tokenomics, as we mentioned, 85 million in circulation at the moment, 100 million max supply initially. However, we will see inflation going on afterwards, and there isn't going to be a max cap of tokens. So do with that information as you wish, but I thought it's always good to just share that with you as well. And a really interesting thing that I saw some proposals about was actually the idea of protocol owned liquidity. And essentially what they are thinking about at the moment is using some of the profits that come from the API3 DAO, use them to actually buy up API3, so some buybacks, pair it with ETH and put it into a Uni V2 pool and lock it forever. And this has a number of really good benefits. Number one, we're actually using the protocol profits to some good use with buybacks, which generally is going to be good for token or token price. But I think more importantly is that we're able to build a huge amount of liquidity. And I think over time, that is always going to be a good thing because less slippage, better fees, etc. So this is a really, really good thing. And I think if API3 can do this, let's see if they do, of course. We haven't seen this just pass us yet. But I think if they are able to do something like this would be really, really cool. So I thought I'll just briefly mention that here, as well as seeing as they were talking about the API3 token. So yeah, that's pretty much what you need to know about the API3 token. I think going hand in hand with that, looking at the treasury, API3 do have a treasury worth around 30 million, with the majority of it being in API3 tokens. But we do have a fair amount in USDC, for example, as well. And with the bear market being fairly brutal, as you can imagine, API3 price is down significantly. So this treasury was worth quite a fair amount more than this before. I'm sure it would have been $100 million plus. But regardless, I think it's a good thing to see that they have plenty of runway going forward. I don't think we're afraid of API3 going out of business this year, like we will see many of the other applications around or many of the other protocols around in crypto, coming out of or going into or being in the depth of a bear market. Whichever one you think we're in at the moment. I mean, for me, I think we're in the depth of a bear market, and I think it's good to see that we have evidence that API3 do have the funds to continue. So yeah, I think that's really good to see. Yes, they do have a few million in stables as well, which is good as well. So yeah, I just wanted to briefly just mention the treasury as well. And then let's talk about the partners. Now, if you go to the API3 website, you'll see all these different partners, lots and lots of different partners, lots of really strong VCs as well involved. But I thought one that we'll probably just talk about today is Polygon. And that's because I've been seeing a lot of stuff with API3 and Polygon recently online. And actually, the first Oracle to be used on Polygon ZK EVM, which is the ZK rollup for Polygon that recently came out, was through API3, which I think is fantastic, and it's really nice to see big blockchains like Polygon working well with oracles like API3. So yeah, good to see lots of partners. I'm sure you can see yourself just how many partners there are just by having a look online or being active on Twitter. You'll see the API3 team doing pretty good on that regard, and there's lots more to come, I'm sure, as well. So we're not going to talk too much about the different partners because, like I said, you can find all of this stuff yourself online as well. But partners are good, but I think we need to see them work together, and I think we have evidence of that with API3 being the first oracle on Polygon ZK EVM. I think it's good to see that. We'll briefly talk about the team as well. I just had a look on LinkedIn, and they say company size 11 to 50 employees, but you can see that there's 33 employees connected to LinkedIn. So I think that's pretty good. Fairly big team actually for a DeFi protocol. I'm used to seeing teams of like less than 10 people, so seeing 30 to 50 employees is huge. I think that's a good thing because we've got a lot of people working hard, and hopefully that helps them ship products a lot quicker. I know that they are quite a fairly active team because they have got quite a few talks, podcasts and things like that online. And here's an example of one that I watched myself, where I think it's Yuga, who's basically talking about third-party versus first-party oracles. So that's a good one to watch. Recommend that. We do have some of the founding members as well, like Dave, who does some really good talks on YouTube as well that I've listened to. Really well-spoken guy. Yuga, as we mentioned. And then we've got some of the rest of the team here that I think you should definitely follow on Twitter. So go follow all these guys, Ben, Asher, Burak, and Midhav as well. Go follow them or go kind of talk to them. They're very, very open on Telegram and Discord. And I think if you do have questions about anything really related to API3, I personally went to the Discord and the Telegram, and I got my answers fairly quickly there. So, if you're interested in that sort of stuff, go there. You'll definitely have some people to talk to and to answer your questions. So yeah, team is good. It's nice to see that as well. And I think it's also important to talk about the bear case. And I've written a few points here, and we're just going to briefly just mention them as well, or talk about them as well. I think the first point that I've written, products in development. Well, I say in development, I believe that they are made at the moment, and it's just really a matter of time before they actually come out. So that's why I've put the asterisk next to it. The products I'm really talking about are the managed decentralized APIs and Oracle Extractable Value. And that's because those are the two that are going to predominantly drive revenue for API3. At the moment, with the products that they have at the moment, they're not really driving any revenue at all. So we're really waiting for them to come out with OEV and managed decentralized APIs for the revenue to really come in. And so, that's one thing that I thought is just worth to mention as well. I think there's also big competition in the Oracle space. I think most of us know about Chainlink, but maybe less so of the others. But there are other kind of competitors around like Python, Redstone, which are similar-ish to API3. We do have other oracles as well, but they do work in a different way. But the whole Oracle kind of scene fairly competitive at the moment, with lots of people coming to the party. I think one of the other issues with API3 is, especially for new users, is some of the complexities. And I think this isn't API3's fault. I think this is just Oracle's by nature are a little bit complex to kind of appreciate and understand. You need to have a pretty good understanding of lots of other things before you can kind of even appreciate what an oracle is. And only once you appreciate what an oracle is, you can really appreciate what something like API3 are doing. Even things like MEV, you need to spend a lot of time to really appreciate and understand what they are. And I think this does make it a little bit difficult for new users who are kind of entering the crypto scene to really grasp everything that's going on, which, you know, I understand, but I think hopefully, you know, people like me can try and help with that. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm basically trying to educate and basically simplify some of the stuff that is going on in the scene. Marketing wise, I think that could probably be improved. You know, I did a simple search of API3 on YouTube and didn't really find too much of value there. So I think things like that could be improved, and hopefully that's where someone like myself comes in to try and help. And I think basically all of these points tie in with each other. Complexities, marketing, and low community engagement. And I think basically if more people like myself can kind of come in, talk about API3, make it simple for people to understand, that will not only help with some of the complexities, that will tick off some of the marketing, but also help with some of the community engagement as well, which I think is predominantly because some of this stuff is a little tricky to kind of understand and get your head around. So hopefully, you know, this stuff does get better over time. I'm hopeful, and I think hopefully over time we will see more people create content, make stuff about API3, kind of explain it to people, and so that they can understand and really appreciate the value of oracles, because without oracles, we would not be in this space at the moment. It would not be what it is right now, and I definitely wouldn't be a DeFi content creator. There was another point here that I found online somewhere. So this isn't my own writing, but I did read that someone wrote that entities responsible for providing the data are not penalized for misbehaving. However, there is a benefit to this approach, namely it's a lot easier to onboard new data providers when they don't have to go out and buy your tokens first. So yeah, just a few points here that I've written down to basically summarize some of the bear case that I can think of regarding API3, some of the drawbacks, but yeah, I hope that clarifies that. And of course, if you have any questions about that, make sure you drop them down in the comment section below. Lastly, we're going to just talk about my overall thoughts, just some of my own personal thoughts. I think it's clear to me that there is value with first-party oracles rather than third-party oracles. We talked about some of their advantages, being more safer in terms of security, being decentralized, not having to trust the middleman, but also being cheaper without having to pay those extra costs that are associated with having extra people in the first place, which is what some of the other Oracle providers have. We've talked about Oracle Extractable value, which in my opinion has big capability to capture large revenue if done successfully, but we'll have to wait and see how that's implemented exactly. So yeah, it's really an exciting part of API3, and really just how but that and the managed decentralized APIs to come will hopefully bring some good revenue. I think the API3 tokenomics are pretty good. It's clear to me that there's value in the token, whether that's from governance, staking, being a collateral. So I think that's always good to see, as a crypto investor. And I think the last element is really just focusing on the decentralization aspect. I think the API3 team knew from the start that if you want to have decentralized oracles, you've got to decentralize everything from the base. That's why they've created the API3 DAO. That's why they've got decentralized oracles. That's why they've got decentralized APIs. And I think things hopefully with this team, which in my opinion are a pretty good team, just from everything that I've seen, we'll continue and hopefully build out some more products. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that you probably need to know to get started with API3. I hope that I've done a good job with explaining some of this stuff. We've covered a lot, as you can imagine, so please feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions. Join the Telegram and Discord group if you want to ask the team any questions or ask any community members any questions. But yeah, feel free to ask me questions at any time. I think oracles are really an exciting part of crypto, and this is infrastructure that we need in order to kind of continue the growth of this space. So API3 are doing a good job, got some good products. So yeah, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, let me know your thoughts down below as well. And yeah, I'll be back with plenty more deep dives, plenty more content in the near future.